Welcome, everybody, and it is today's edition of the Post-Gazette live show, the big show I call it. In fact, I think I'm going to petition to call it the big show because it is, of course, the big show at 5 o'clock or there, a couple minutes before or after every single day. We talk about a lot of different things. Of course, today we've got lots to get to. In the world of the NFL, there's a bunch of different coaching moves that have been made, some that still have to be made. Some that, makes you wonder what some of these franchises are thinking. We've got a lot of that to go. We've got some things on how that will impact the Steelers. And, of course, it seems like the Steelers are always they're always in the crosshairs of national guys when it comes to this idea that the Steelers are always interesting. And so it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But one thing that seems to be very, very clear to me, and it's very clear to anybody that's followed the NFL, is that increasingly coaches are looking to take a job where they have a chance to win, meaning they have a high draft pick for a quarterback or there's already a quarterback in place. And teams are willing to try and take a look at guys that are going to maybe be able to maximize what they do from the quarterback position. Clearly, if you look at it, the big news is, and it's really not that surprising, because I think he was the number one guy on the market. He seemed like he was a guy that everybody was really, really trying to get. And it's for the reason that we're talking about. Ben Johnson is an offensive guy. I don't know. Do we use the word offensive guru? Quarterback guy. He's one of these guys where, honestly, if you think about it, everyone watched what Jared Goff did and was like, boy, this guy really knows what he's doing. It's kind of funny to me, too. Lions fans are really trying to figure out, how to put a positive spin on this one. And the best they can come up with, and as far as I can see, is that they're trying to say that basically, Ben Johnson choked in the biggest game of the year, yada, yada. They scored 31 points. They had 30 first downs. They had 521 total yards. They averaged 7.7 yards per play. You want to tell me that the trick play where he had a reverse and, they had, a receiver throw it and got intercepted was on him? Okay, fine. But if you look at it, reality is this. It's not his fault they turned it over 4 other times. And those numbers, 500 yards, 7.7 yards per play, I mean, they did okay. 31 points, that generally should be enough to win a playoff game. You have the 4 turnovers and you have the fact that they were still missing some guys on defense. Obviously, they lose the game. It wasn't on Ben Johnson. It wasn't on Ben Johnson, if that's the discussion that people are trying to have. He did a really good job. And I think, it's clear if you look at what he did. He looked around the league. The Raiders obviously have Tom Brady pulling him. And I think probably this is how the conversation went from Tom Brady to Mike Johnson, because Brady's a part of the Raiders. Ben Johnson said, hey, Tom, are you going to be playing for the Raiders? Well, no, I've retired. Okay, thanks, but no thanks. I mean, the Raiders' job, the quarterback situation isn't great at all. It's not even good. It's not even, steady. It's not stable. I mean, it's the kind of quarterback job that a guy takes that job, and if that quarterback situation doesn't change, guy gets fired in 3 or 4 years. He looked at, I'm sure, Dallas. I mean, again, I'm not sure what people think of Dak Prescott, but I'm not sure I'd want to get involved in the Dallas job just from the standpoint of I just don't think that Dak Prescott is your guy. The Jacksonville job obviously has Trevor Lawrence, but there's some things structurally about the organization not really in a good place. So at the end of the day, if you're Ben Johnson, you say, I don't want to get involved in that mess until it's all solved. And you know what? I'm not going to wait around. The Jets have a problem with a quarterback, of course, unless you consider, 95-year-old Aaron Rodgers a solution. So really, and the Saints, same kind of thing. I mean, I think the Saints, if you look at the Saints and what they've done, they were at a place where they were kind of hoping that they had a bridge guy in Derek Carr. But their young quarterback is Spencer Rattler. I didn't think he was good at South Carolina, so I certainly don't think he's going to be good in the NFL. At the end of the day, Ben Johnson, however, is what these teams all look for, which is why his name was mixed up in just about every place. Now, he's taken the Bears job because obviously they have Caleb Williams already in place. It's such an important piece. And it's one of the things we've talked about with the Steelers. They need to figure that out before they figure anything else out. And if it's going to be Justin Fields, and it's kind of funny, this shows you how this offseason is going to go. I'm going to give you a little hint. Whatever you hear or read, until you hear or read it from the Steelers, I would be very careful because I've already seen reports that Russell Wilson, the Steelers are not going to go to Russell Wilson. I've seen reports that the Steelers are going to go to Russell Wilson. I've seen reports that the Steelers want to build their team around Justin Fields. I've seen reports where the Steelers don't think Justin Fields is good enough. I don't know what to tell you, honestly. But that's reality. And reality is, I look at it that way, and I just say it's so important to note that there's going to be a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people with quote-unquote sources, but I don't know how many sources, they really have. Some of them are agent sources. Some of them are team sources. Some of them are sources that are, whatever. But at the end of the day, until something actually happens, you don't know. We don't know what's going to go on. But that being said, if you look at what Ben Johnson is bringing, the hope is that he can bring the magic to Caleb Williams that he has for Jared Goff. And if he does, the Bears will be, halfway to where they need to be. I don't know that, that means that they'll get all the way there. But I think it means that they're probably going to get closer than what they were with Matt Eberflus or whatever his name is. It does leave the other teams. If you look at the other teams, if I was a coach, I was a guy who was, one of the hot coordinators. I would love it if you would weigh in with the comments. All of the jobs that are left, which one would you take? The Jets apparently are going to hire this Aaron Glenn, who's the defensive coordinator of the Lions. I guess if Lions fans are looking to seek comfort there, they could say, well, the last 4 or 5 weeks, his defenses were terrible. But, of course, there was a lot of injuries and a lot of other stuff going on. So I don't think people will be holding that against him. So at the end of the day, I feel like it's, one of those things where Aaron Glenn played for the Jets. Again, there's no quarterback in place, so it's a risky job to take as your first job. He's very popular there. Apparently, they just hired the general manager, I think was the assistant general manager in Washington, and apparently has some kind of relationship with Aaron Glenn. That helps. But if they don't figure out the quarterback situation, I'm not sure what's going to happen. The other thing I would say is he's the kind of guy, and Ben Johnson too, probably needs to hire a really good staff. And you say, well, what do you mean? Well, if you're not a first-time coach, you can maybe get away with staff that's not top-notch. But I think if you're a first-time coach, you better go find a great staff. But if I was just, oh, okay, they just hired. I guess it just came across that he was actually just hired. If you were a coach, you're the hot, I'm going to put this to you. You're the hot coordinator right now. Looking at the jobs that are available, you have your pick of the jobs. Which one would you take? I know which one I would take. I would sort of roll the dice here because there's some things unsettled in the front office, but I think I would honestly go with Jacksonville. I still believe that Trevor Lawrence coached right with the right team around him, with the right, with the right staff around him to develop him, with the right, philosophy to utilize his talents. I still think that's the best place to go. I still think that Jacksonville is the next best job that's available now that the Bears are off the table, and it's because of the quarterback. And I think, you look at Dallas. I'm sorry, would have no interest at all, none, at working for Jerry Jones. I mean, seriously, we laugh about, Mike Tomlin won with other people's players or whatever. What has Jerry Jones accomplished without Jimmy Johnson's team? I mean, yeah, if you want to technically say, well, they did win a Super Bowl with Barry Switzer. Again, that was Jimmy Johnson's team, the team that he built. Right after that Super Bowl, that team started to really fall apart. Since then, the Cowboys have been one of these teams that are far more popular and whatever than they should be, given their record, given how good they've been. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Jerry Jones is a meddler. He's a guy that basically is a hands-on guy who wants so badly to be a football guy. I mean, seriously, when the Cowboys played the Steelers, I was amazed when I walked into the locker room and Jerry Jones was in there with a bunch of reporters around him giving interviews as if he was one of the players or one of the coaches or whatever. I mean, and I'm thinking to myself, could you imagine Art Rooney doing that? Art Rooney does one interview a year, basically, essentially. Now, he does, if there's stuff goes on, like when, Franco's number or whatever, the guy goes to the Hall of Fame, something happens, he might give a little interview of some sort. But for the most part, he does one press conference or one interview, and guess what? Not everybody's invited. He does one. Most owners you never hear from. Jerry Jones wants everybody to know he is the guy that's the football guy, even though he makes a lot of dumb decisions. So I don't know you want to work for a guy like Jerry Jones who's going to meddle in what you do, who's going to have his fingers in everything you want. He's going to try and tell you how to run your team. No. Especially not if I'm a coordinator and that's my first job. I'm not looking for that. The Raiders it's a disaster of an organization. There's no ands, ifs, or buts. The Raiders are a disaster of an organization, and I think that when you think about that, you say to yourself, do I really want to get involved in that? Especially since the Raiders were bad this year, but the thing about it is they weren't quite bad enough to land, one of the top picks. They draft 6th. They need a quarterback. There's really only 2 quarterbacks that are on the board that people think are going to be drafted that high or even maybe in the first round. They're probably both going to be off the board before you pick. And if that's the case, then what are you going to do? Make a run at Sam Darnold, I think, might be available, or, Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson or whatever. I don't know if I'm a coach. I don't know if I want that situation to be my first job ever. So there's also, we said the Jets are pretty much off the board with Aaron Glenn. The Saints are interesting, but they're very similar in that they need a quarterback. I think the Saints are a better organization, however, than the Raiders. And I think the Saints are smart. The Raiders are talking about Pete Carroll. I mean, for what he is, I guess, I don't know. Does that really excite you, Pete Carroll? I don't know. I think the one thing he'll do, which is what he's very good at, is build an organization and build some structure and, be able to do it the right way and all that other good stuff. I think that might be the case. But to me, honestly, I don't think that he's going to be the guy that's going to, get them through. and get them through to the next, where they need to get to the next level. He might clean up some of the mess, but I just don't know that he's the guy I want to see, if I'm a Raiders fan. The Saints, by the way, are going to go after Mike McCarthy. I actually think Mike McCarthy is probably a better coach than people give him ready. Give him credit for. I mean, that's what I would tell you. I just don't know that he's that good. I mean, I don't know that he's that bad. I think he did an okay job with Dallas, given all the issues they had this year, to be honest. I really do. I think it's one of those things where it's just, you got to think about it from that standpoint of what the Cowboys were, all the injuries they had, everything else. I mean, I don't know. It's important to note that, you know what? He kept that team together probably longer than they should be together this year. Probably should have fell apart. And I think that's what the problem is. So, I look at all these guys, and it's clear that, Carroll and McCarthy are the two that are sort of retread guys. But, like Jacksonville is talking about a guy most people don't know a whole lot about. He's the offensive line coach for Tampa Bay. And I think one of the things about this name is Liam Cohen. And here's where they're thinking. Because I said, what? Why would they? What? But here's what they're thinking. What they're thinking is, if we can build an offensive line that's really good for Trevor Lawrence, that's going to take care of almost all of the problems that we've had on offense, because we haven't been able to protect him. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But again, it's based on quarterbacks, really. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what you're looking at with respect to, who is in the coaching carousel right now. But again, I look at these teams, and I think the ones that are thinking in terms of offensive coaches, and I don't necessarily know that you have to, but I do think that you have to think about, how are teams winning in the NFL right now? How are teams winning? And I would tell you that they're probably winning with offense. And I think that when you're looking at the league and how it is and how it's happening, you have to think about that if you're a team. And I think that's one of the problems with the Steelers, and probably what holds them back with the Steelers, is that they've got a defensive-minded coach and a defensive-minded philosophy, organization-wide. And if they were to move on from Mike Tomlin, I would hope that, or if Mike Tomlin were to move on, I would hope that they would really seriously think about going out and getting an offensive coach. Now, for the Steelers' sake, and really everybody else's sake, I'm looking at the list of free agent quarterbacks, because that's the other problem all these teams are going to have. Go find a quarterback. Go find a quarterback in this market. We've already talked about the draft market, not very good. But when you start to talk about, for instance, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and people say, I want something different. Okay, what? I'm going to give you the names right now. Now, some other guys might become available, but as of right now, here are the names on the market for 2025. 38 quarterbacks who are going to be on the market in 2025. The top guy is Sam Darnold. Would you rather have Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, or Russell Wilson as a Steeler fan? Zach Wilson. How about him? I know I'd rather have Fields and Wilson over Zach Wilson. I might take Sam Darnold over those two guys. Probably not, though. I'm not a big fan of his. I think what you saw the last 2 weeks of the season or the last week of the season in the playoffs is probably who he is. Trey Lance, I have no interest in. Jacoby Brissett, no interest. Taylor Heineke, no interest. Marcus Mariota, no interest. Are you sensing some kind of pattern here? Jarrett Stidham, no interest. Drew Lock, no interest. Andy Dalton, I didn't even know he was still playing. Justin Fields. Okay, well, clearly, we get that far down on the list in terms of salary. I'd take him over just about – actually, I'll take him over all the other guys I just named. Then you've got Flacco. I can't imagine he's got another year, right? Then you've got Joe Flacco. You got Jameis Winston. You've got, let's see, Mac Jones, Carson Wentz, Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, what are we talking about here? That's the biggest problem I got is, it's one thing to sit here and say, oh, well, we want to have this quarterback. We want to come and get a – who are these quarterbacks? Oh, here's a name, Mason Rudolph, Easton Stick, Cooper Rush. Hey, here's another name, Josh Dobbs, Nick Mullins, Kyle Trask. There's just nobody really that's available on this list. And actually, when you go through and you look at this list, I'll be honest with you, I think Russell Wilson and Justin Fields might be the two best players on this list. And I know, it sounds crazy, but again, I just went through it. Tell me who you think. You want to tell me Darnold? Maybe. I might listen to that. But the rest of this list is bad. There isn't guys out there. So it's just one of these things where I hear a lot of people talking about, quick fixes at quarterback, go out and grab this guy or that guy. Those guys aren't out there right now. There's nobody on the list that excites me. Now, if someone becomes available with a Russell Wilson-like trade or something from Seattle to Denver, if you're something like that becomes available, Kyler Murray, some of those guys, there's a couple of guys like that might be available. I'm not saying him, but I'm just saying there's a couple other guys that might be available even though they're under contract via trade. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure really. If I look at that list, if I'm all that excited about any of those guys. So now you look at it, you say Justin Fields and Russell Wilson are probably your best two options. They probably are. And quite frankly, if you're going to say we're going to commit to Justin Fields. Okay, good. Commit to Justin Fields. Who's the best option you have as a backup? Well, let's say Russell Wilson can go to, the Saints or somewhere and maybe still get a starting job. Okay, good. Who do you want as a backup here? Zach Wilson? No. Trey Lance? No. Jacoby Brissett? No. Taylor Heineke? No. Marcus Mariota? No. Drew Lock? No. Jarrett Stidham? No. Andy Dalton? No. Joe Flacco? No. Jameis Winston? I mean, he's better than the rest of these guys. But you only want him to play one or two games because if he plays more than one or two games, he throws a bunch of interceptions. I'm just saying. I know between now and the draft and everything else, there'll be all this discussion about quarterbacks. I have to tell you, this is one of the least impressive groups of free agent and quarterbacks in the draft that I can remember in a long, long time. Long, long time. I can't remember the last time that happened. Honestly. And that it's been this bad. So if you're a team in the hunt for a quarterback, this might be the year you want to hold on to your guys. And the reason I bring that up, again, is because there's a lot of discussion around here about moving on from Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Okay, where are you getting a replacement for those two guys? Because the list I just read to you, guess what? Doesn't have those two guys. It doesn't have guys that are better than those two guys. Darnold? Come on, man. Come on, man. I'm just not that excited about it. Sam Darnold. Some people are. I think that's the biggest thing. Someone just brought up Matthew Stafford perhaps being available. I think he's still reasonably good. But if you're him, are you coming here? Given what you see with the offense, you probably have a better options elsewhere. No. I'm not coming here, at least. Someone else might, but I'm not. And so I look at it that way, and I basically say, if you're going to talk about the Steelers moving on and to a different quarterback, tell me who it is. Because those guys out there just don't exist this year. There's no real trade to be made that probably is going to put you over the top. And that's just the way it is, which is why, circling back to our discussion earlier, if you think about it, if you're one of these first-time coaches, I mean, Jacksonville's still on the board, and they obviously have a pretty good quarterback in place, but now you're down to jobs that don't really have a quarterback in place. I don't know how you're going to get better. Maybe, you can draft one if you think Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders and you draft that high in the draft, but the reality is I'm just not sure that you're going to be able to get better quickly. It's just not going to be that easy to do, period. By the way, the game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street, Archie's home of 80-cent wings, home of the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. I was down there last night for the national championship game at Archie's. It was a packed house. So Saturday, Sunday, if you want to go down and watch football this weekend, Archie's is a great place to be. Archie's on Carson Street in the South Side, and tell them Paul Zeise sent you when you get there. Real quickly, we were talking about I was just briefly talk about the national championship game, and not so much the game. Ohio State was clearly better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame, had a couple of late plays that made it closer than it actually was. Ohio State, to me, was clearly far and away the best team. The good news about the 12-team playoff is that a team like Ohio State can win, because Ohio State had no chance of winning in a 4-team playoff because they wouldn't have made it. They finished fourth in the Big Ten. Number one. Number two, they had that terrible loss to Michigan, but they had another loss too to Oregon. 2-loss team was not going to get into a 4-team playoff. And so if you think about it, the reality there is Ohio State, the 12-team playoff worked from the standpoint of it got all of the teams in that legitimately can win the national title. Period. Like, the argument about 12, 13, 14, I don't care if you put Alabama instead of SMU. I guess SMU was the last team in. I don't know who else was. Who else was one of the last teams in? Was it Indiana or whoever it was? I don't even remember. But there was a big argument about Indiana and SMU. I remember those two teams essentially. The reality of that is, if you replace those two teams with Alabama and South Carolina, were those are the two teams that everyone was whining about, or Ole Miss, those teams were not winning the national title. They weren't getting anywhere close to it. They might have won one game, depending on the matchup they had or whatever, but they weren't winning the national title. What I mean is the whole purpose of the playoff is to make sure you're not excluding a team that can legitimately win the national title. Ohio State was that team this year. It really was. And I think when you think about it, looking at Ohio State, they were probably the best team all year, even though they lost twice. And it's going to have to change the mentality, I think, of a lot of college football fans that, going undefeated is hard, and it's not nearly as important as positioning yourself in the playoff. And that's what they did. They did a good job of positioning themselves in the playoff by winning 10 games, by beating, some good teams during the season and all that other stuff. And I think that they proved they belong, but more importantly, they proved that they're one of the teams that could win the national title. I mean, I think there were a few teams that could win the national title. Oregon probably was one. Notre Dame was probably one. Maybe Penn State, maybe Texas. But for the most part, there weren't that many teams that could actually legitimately go and win 4 games or 3 games and go win a national title like Ohio State just did. So at the end of the day, Alabama fans, Ole Miss fans, all these teams, whining and crying about not being in the championship, not being in the playoff or whatever, you weren't going to win it anyway. It's not like before where the 5th place or the 5th team in the rankings was left out, and the 5th team you looked at and you said, boy, if that team got in, like one year, a couple years ago when Georgia was the 5th team left out, you kind of felt like, boy, if Georgia got in, they'd beat everybody. I don't know that there's anybody out there, that got left out of the 12-team playoff that you'd say, boy, if they got in, they could have won it all. Honestly. That's why I tell you, it worked. As much as we hated the schedule, as much as we hated the seedings, as much as we hated the important thing is you got the best 12 teams in, period. Or at least you've got the best 4, 5, 6 teams in, and those are the teams that legitimately had a chance to go win the thing. So I feel like when you start splitting hairs about who's 13, 14, 15, who's 18, it doesn't matter. Because the teams that can actually win the championship, they got in. Period. They got in. And I think that's the thing that the whole system was designed to do, to make sure that the Ohio States of the world, who might have lost in a rivalry game, which they did against Michigan, but they had it. Everybody kind of knew, boy, if they got in, they're probably one of the best teams, which they were. Which, by the way, if you're a Steeler fan, I know it's 2 years away because he's a freshman, but if you want to talk about wish list guys, how about Jeremiah Smith? You think he'd look good in a Steelers uniform? I mean, I think if you put him on the Steelers next year, he'd be their best receiver, and that includes George Pickens. I think he would be their best receiver. That guy's a really, really, really good player. You want to talk about a guy that the Steelers would love to have? Jeremiah Smith is a guy that they should have. Period. Bring him in. See what happens. See how good he does. I think he's going to be a star. And it's a crime that he's got to wait 2 more years before he can enter the draft. To be honest, it's a crime. It's one of the things about the NFL draft that I don't like, because I don't think it's fair. These guys have to wait until, their 3rd year out of high school before they're able to go. That to me, really, when I was watching the game last night, that to me was one of the things where I said, boy, if the Steelers could have one of these 2 wideouts from Ohio State, I'd be more than happy. I really would. At any rate, we'll do it again tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Paul.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.